Do the Warriors need to be concerned? What can Steve Kerr do to shake them out of their doldrums? Does Klay Thompson get frozen out? The only question left is, say it with me, you win? Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown Podcast. Today I am excited to bring on friend of the Breakdown, Mark Medina, who is the Warriors beat writer for the Mercury News Bay Area News Group. He also hosts the Planet Dubs podcast. His Twitter handle is MarkG_Medina. And Mark, thank you for coming on the show. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. I remember I always loved being on your show. I remember we were on, a year or so ago where we were talking about just all the ugliness surrounding the state of the Lakers when I was the Lakers beat writer down in L.A. for the L.A. Daily News. It's real interesting now. It's a whole change of events. I'm covering the defending NBA champions, so it's an interesting dynamic with just how different it is.
Oh, sure. We could go even farther back than that when you came in to do a live green screen show at YouTube Studios.
Your studio. That was awesome.
Now, that was probably like 2012 maybe or something, right?
Yeah, I remember we're talking about Dwight Howard's free agency.
Oh, wow. That must have been
unbelievable. That was only 6 years ago.
That is insane. So, yeah, so definitely, Friend of the Breakdown is an apt title for you for being a part of the conversation for so long. And I was excited. I ran into up in the Bay Area this past weekend. I was hanging out with the Warriors a little bit and checking out the game between the Spurs. Let's just talk about what were your general impressions of the Spurs game itself on Saturday night?
Well, it's real interesting. The Spurs never die. When you think, okay, this is the time that they are going to do it, they never do. Tim Duncan's been retired for a while now, but they haven't had Kawhi Leonard all season, and Tony Parker's been out, but they're a well-tuned engine. And I think what was really interesting in the context of Warriors-Spurs, this illustrated they could be a pretty good playoff matchup. The Spurs always are, but it also illustrated that at some point, the Warriors' star power, the Warriors' depth eventually comes into overdrive. So what you had was the Warriors not having the best start, but finally they got it together. Their second unit came out to slice away at a deficit. And then the third quarter, it was just guns blazing, and the Warriors just kept making shot after shot. And that's been kind of the theme this season, where they're almost like any normal defending NBA championship team. They're kind of trying to navigate that season of they don't want to skip steps, but they know it's a long season. They don't want to get bent out of shape when they're not playing well because they know it's a long season. But there are stretches where sometimes the players and Steve Kerr get a little bit concerned that some of those bad habits become a trend.
Well, let's talk about the trend for a second there, because I'm looking through some stats, and I'm really fascinated by the net rating of the five-man lineups that Kerr has been playing. And when you look at the last 19 games, which is basically when Steph Curry came back after his brief injury out, the starting lineup has played the most minutes by far, 12 games, 160 minutes. Their net rating is negative 5.7, and their defensive rating is 118.4, which I think would probably be last in the league if I check it real quick.
Yeah.
What is going on here? Is this a first quarter thing only? Because it seems like the third quarter is better. But why is their starting five such a difference from in years past?
Yeah, it's interesting because these guys have 4 All-Stars on the team, and they're not playing like that at all. I think if you look at the numbers, Nick, the first quarter and third quarter differentials are entirely different when you're looking at production, plus, minus. And it's a real interesting school of thought that makes this issue a little bit complex, gives the team a little bit of an excuse, but also gives some perspective where you have two things in play. The Warriors getting off to slow starts has to do with what we're talking about, the complacency. They're a little bit bored when they don't face a team that's, not the Celtics or the Cavaliers or any potential playoff matchup. They feel like they can just go through the motion. So you have that side of the coin. But then you have the other pragmatic side of the coin where the Warriors are a target. They're the defending champs. Every team wants to give them their best shot. And for especially teams that aren't on anywhere near the Warriors level, they know that there's very little margin for error. So they're coming out of the games just throwing the kitchen sink at them, exerting a lot of effort. You're seeing coaches draw up a lot of intricate plays. And the Warriors end, they've noticed this trend, so they feel like they can kind of rope-a-dope them a little bit, wait them out. They know at some point they'll get exhausted, fatigued, and then that's when the second unit comes in, the second quarter, and then the third quarter is when those starters just start pummeling them away. What's interesting within that framework, the second quarter thing has actually only been a trend as of late. Their bench identity until now has been actually pretty inconsistent, but because of guys like David West and Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala, even though Andre's shot isn't good, they've been really able to fortify a unit that helps chip away and make up for some of those slow starts. So because of all those different things, that's what's made this Warriors season very fascinating. I think a challenge for both Steve Kerr and his staff and the players to properly navigate.
What are you hearing, though, in the locker room from the players themselves about this? I mean, are they trying to just shrug it off and just say they're in the midst of a 4 straight finals run and it's February? Or are you hearing other things that might be a little bit concerning about, whether they're going to shake this off and turn the switch on?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Nick. I think before last week, what you were hearing were all those cliches of it's a long season and it's a process, and they're coming off of 3 straight finals runs. They were in China during preseason. But last week, when they lost 3 or 4 games against teams that frankly weren't good. I mean, OKC is good, but they had a really ugly loss against Utah. They won against Sacramento, but Sacramento should have won that, but they're just inept, and the Warriors had like 25 turnovers. And then Denver's a good team, but they just weren't bringing it. I think it's after that stretch, from body language, the way the players and Steve Kerr were talking about, it wasn't a state of panic, but it was a state of being open that these are problems that you can't just sweep under the rug because we have a lot of talent. Those specific games showed that even though they have a lot of talent to make up for some of their miscomings, their issues in terms of turnovers, fouling, how they handle their emotions with officiating, those weaknesses were all glaring enough to make them exposed where talent couldn't always compensate for those issues. So I think right now they're trying to dig themselves out of it. Hasn't been the best performances against Dallas and San Antonio, but I think they've turned a corner, relatively speaking, and now the hope is they can end they can end these past 2 games, Phoenix and Portland, on a somewhat good note. When they get to the All-Star break, they hit the recharge button, and then you're going to see a much stronger effort, tighter rotations, and you'll see just the way the NBA schedule is. These games will feel more purposeful because it's closer to the playoffs, and there's going to be more implications in terms of the stand-ins.
For sure. What's frightening is that when the teams come back from the All-Star break, there's only 23 games left. It's like the season is almost over at this point. That all makes sense to me. It was funny because I just did a video, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, basically the title was How to Beat the Warriors. And it was funny because I mentioned it to Steve Kerr when I was up there, and he hadn't seen it yet. But he goes, "Well, let me guess. Be physical with us. Turnovers, our shooting." And it literally was in the exact order that I had done it.
Wow.
It was crazy. I was like, "Are you sure you didn't see it?" Yeah. And so it seems like there are some issues, though, and certainly, being physical with this team, can cause problems. I suppose the only issue there is how many of the Western Conference teams are out there that can play that physical ball like the Thunder have. Now, the Rockets have also beaten them twice. Of course, once was on opening night, which could very well be a toss-up on that one. But that's the question. Who has athletes, do you think, that could be physical enough like we saw with the Thunder?
Well, I'll couch my answer with saying that even with these issues, unless the Warriors' main 4 guys, right, Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, unless any of those guys have a major injury, they're winning the NBA championship. But I think what you've seen, the Rockets, I think OKC in particular, even, Boston for sure, they were able to get a win there. The 3 things that they were able to expose take advantage of the fact that the Warriors are very turnover prone. They like to be fancy with the ball. It kind of plays into their carefree almost and wanting to play with joy, but it leads to bad mistakes. And I think someone like Houston, Oklahoma City, they can get out on the open floor and take advantage of that with transition opportunities. I think Houston, and you saw in the regular season against Boston as well, they were most effective and taken advantage of the Warriors' second weakness. That was the fouls. Houston gets a lot of trips to the free throw line to begin with. James Harden is most notorious for doing that. But with Houston in particular, that I think did two things, or actually three things. The Warriors got into foul trouble. All of a sudden, their rotation shrank. They can't be as aggressive. Houston's getting free points at the free throw line. And then third, it's taken away Golden State's half-court game. And Houston loves to play in the full court, so they were the only ones that really had the advantage there. And then I think the third, which kind of ties into the fouls, is haven't had a good track record this season in handling the adversity that comes with the officiating this year. Draymond Green has 14 technicals. I think Kevin Durant has 11. Steve Kerr, to his credit, points some finger point at himself. I think he has 5. Steph Curry had his mouthpiece incident. So I know it's been a league-wide issue of this new wave of referees and how players are responding to it, just that kind of the give and take, the back and forth. But with all that said, the Warriors have not responded the best. They have the most technicals. They have the most ejections. And that, I think, I wouldn't want to say it's surprising. You've seen, in the finals most notably 2 years ago against Cleveland, where Draymond had that infamous incident with LeBron in Game 5. Game 4, he winds up having that suspension. Steph Curry throws his mouthpiece. He gets fined. But typically speaking, Nick, like most defending NBA championship teams, they have that cloth of they're battle tested. They know how to handle adversity. These kind of issues are what inexperienced playoff teams go through or young teams go through. So that part, I think, is a little striking. And Bob Myers addressed that whole issue last week about improving that. So I'd like to think they can improve that, but they just have to prove that they can.
Oh, for sure. And I'm also sure people out there have felt the same kind of frustration that Draymond feels when online dating. Random matches, judging by someone's picture. None of these methods work quite like eHarmony. Because at eHarmony, they are looking for your perfect match by using years of science, data, and psychological research to send you the right matches. So this isn't a swipe to the right hookup site. It's a place when you're ready for a meaningful relationship. I couldn't get over how thorough the registration process is and left no doubt that they'd find a good pool of matches to choose from. Right now, you can get a free month of eHarmony when you sign up for a 3-month subscription by entering my code COACH at checkout. Stop waiting and start your journey to a satisfying, meaningful relationship. It can be fun to play around with online dating apps, but when you're ready to fall in love with someone and have a meaningful relationship, there's one app that's built to bring you real love. eHarmony. Come see how eHarmony can change your life. Go to eHarmony.com and get started and enter my code COACH at checkout. The push and pull of Draymond is you want him to play with that ferociousness and that emotion. Mm-hmm. It's what makes their defense so amazing. But then that will clearly connects with him getting into trouble. How many more technicals until he gets suspended?
He has 2 more. Yeah, he's at 14, so that if he gets 2 more, he's going to have that 1-game suspension without pay. And then from my understanding, from that point on, you basically can go up to 2 more technicals, and then you get another suspension. So once he gets to that point, it's kind of the point of no return. Now, granted, it is the end of the season. Once the playoffs start, that the reset button hits on that. But still, I'm not so concerned if I'm the Warriors, I'm not so concerned of maybe Draymond has a suspension. But I think it's more of the idea of the team as a whole, including Draymond, of, hey, playoff basketball, it's going to be physical. Calls aren't going to go your way. You have to handle those emotions well, because at that point, the consequence of having a technical, an extra possession with the other team could decide the difference in a playoff game.
Oh, I agree. And I feel like that's the argument that Draymond will present to Steve Kerr would be something like, what do you want? Do you want me to play like I play, or do you want me to play like without any emotion and not get that technical fouls? And of course, Steve Kerr has to say, no, you have to play, the way you play best, which is that way on the edge. And it reminds me a little bit of Rodman when he got to the Bulls in '96 when they had their 72-10 year. There's that famous clip of Scotty basically tackling him before he could go and run at the ref. Yeah. And then the next shot is Phil on the bench laughing too, which I thought was the best reaction, because you can imagine like Tibbs or some other coach might not have been laughing at that, and they were able to diffuse. So that's the question is, I wonder if that's what they're missing too, is they don't have a guy on that team who's going to get in between Draymond and the ref enough to get him to defuse right away.
Yeah, I think, maybe guys like Sean Livingston, David West, as like established vets, they can do that. But to your point, I mean, Draymond Green, I guess the phrase just of how ironic it is, he was the one that was trying to calm Kevin Durant down one time when he got ejected. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting, and we know it's Draymond Green. He has emotions. This has been kind of the story of his career. But I think even though I understood his frustration this past week in particular, where Jeremy Grant from OKC elbowed him, he got a bloody mouth. He had to get actually some dental work. There was no call, even though the officials were on the baseline there. Then I think his technical the other night against Dallas, where he was kind of dismissively waving, it is in the rule book, but it wasn't that demonstrative. And from Draymond's point of view, he was trying to get the ball off his shoulder after making a layup. It wasn't trying to cause a delay, a game penalty. But with all that said, to his credit, he has shown how he can navigate this. He went through 13 games just recently where he didn't pick up a technical. And what he did on those games, he still played fiery. He was still that physical guy. But any time the officials made a call that he didn't agree with, he turned the other way. He did not engage with the ref at all, whether in words, body language. There was zero interaction. All he did was he walked the other way of the side of the court, and whatever frustrations he had, he expressed them, but it was away from the officials. They could not see it or hear it. So I think, if you're looking for a solution, I know that Draymond was expressing frustration recently that he doesn't know what to do, but to his credit, he showed what he can do through those 13 games. That at this point, there's no point in even trying to engage because obviously officials haven't taken kindly to his demonstrative behavior. But even if he's maybe trying to take a different tact of having a conversation or even giving positive reinforcement, maybe the officials will wonder his intentions there. So he plays the game and knows the game much better than I do, but I'm speaking from the vantage point of what he showed those 13 games. All he needs to do is apply it there, and I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's a really great, that's the thing is, are there tools that you can develop on your own to help you cope or whatever? The funny thing I thought was with Holtkamp against OKC, the woman referee, it was really strange. She seemed, because, you never know where you're going to be, the slot, the lead official, the trail official. It just, in the flow of the game, it changes rapidly. She kept being the one who had to blow the whistle every single time for like a while. I don't know if you noticed that, but it was so weird to watch where, and the action was right in front of her. It was her call. She had to make it, but it was strange. But then you see her, like Draymond is arguing. I don't even know if it was the bloody mouth one, but he's arguing with her about something. And she's like, "Get out of my face, Draymond. Get out of my face, Draymond."
Yeah.
And, Yeah. And that's a technical foul. If the referee gets to you and says it twice, and you don't, then you're going to get a technical foul, and you have to accept that. And I thought that was interesting.
Right, yeah, that was the interaction with Lauren Holtkamp rooted from the Jeremy Grant, and that was his first technical foul along the baseline. And then he got ejected. I'm forgetting who the official was, but this was in the second half where he got called for a foul. He just kind of dismissively handed the ball off to the official, and that's when he got ejected. But I know the Warriors in particular, they're not going to comment publicly by name, but I know that they're frustrated specifically with Lauren Holtkamp. She was also the one that made the call. It didn't decide the game. They were down by so many points by that point, but she was the one that made the call where Russell Westbrook literally fell on his own 2 feet, tripped over himself, and it was weird. They called it against Kevin Durant live action, and then the scorebook says it was on Andre Iguodala. But I think in the Warriors' mind, this was kind of one of those things. Well, the frustration was somewhat warranted, but the problem is they've had such a track record earlier in the season where they could have handled their emotions much better.
I got some more stats for you. I was looking this up the other day. I'm kind of checking it right now while we're talking. But basically, it looks to me that Kevin Durant this year was taking 1.5 more field goals a game. It's about one more now. And we saw that Klay and Curry had pretty much that was the difference. They were losing shots to him more. Klay is actually scoring only 20.1 points a game, even though he's shooting really well from three. Is that dynamic an issue between them? I kind of see on Twitter, and I think it's nonsense, but I feel like I just want to ask you, is there a notion of maybe Klay might not throw it to Durant sometimes or vice versa?
I haven't seen that. I think on average, some of Durant's numbers, specifically, a lot of it had to do with Steph being out for 13 games. So just by design, his usage rate went up. And I think to Durant's credit during that time, he really had a cool blend of exerting on a leadership role. Obviously, he's the most talented scorer out there, but he wasn't necessarily high volume. I mean, there were a few games that was high volume, but for the most part, he was still efficient. He still set guys up. The other point that he made about Klay is really interesting, and it's not an issue because it's Klay Thompson. I think if it may be another player, it could be an issue. There's really weird stretches where he'll fire maybe 4 or 5 shots to open the quarter, and he gets 10 points off the bat, and you think, oh my gosh, this is a Klay Thompson 60-point night, and all of a sudden they go away from him. And Klay doesn't complain about it because this is Klay. And I don't think it's intentional, but I think it's almost subconscious where they do move the ball on purpose. I mean, there's sometimes they're going ISO, but it's almost like Klay is taken for granted so much that it's almost caught up to them, where he's not going to be demonstrative of calling for the ball, and he's available and he's there, but they just don't think, hey, we need to have a conscious effort to get him the ball because he's always shown he can always catch and shoot whenever you get it to him. And so it's an interesting trend. Like, I don't think it's intentional by any means, at least the way I read it. But I think it speaks to, if it was someone other than Klay Thompson, that could have definitely been an issue this season within that dynamic.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's an interesting thing I want to throw out there, because when you look at the turnovers, they are maddening, especially from a coach's point of view. You just want to pull out your hair saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But almost equally as frustrating is their shot selection sometimes. And Klay is usually the main culprit of that, where he'll just take a shot, just to take a shot. Probably in that reaction, maybe he won't say anything, be demonstrative, but he's like, I am going to take a shot now. But here's the thing that's interesting. He has trimmed down the shots this year, and he is by far shooting the best of his career. You know, his effective field goal percentage is much higher than it's ever been. His three-point percentage is higher. His field goal percentage overall is much better, and also from 2. And I have to think that part of the reason that he's trimmed away a couple of those really bad doozies that would be misses because they're bad shots. And I'm wondering if that's maybe a connection now that they're going to make, saying, oh, wow, I'm going to be much more efficient.
Yeah, I know there were a few games. I think when there was a game where both Steph and Durant were out, and you kind of saw a window of, hey, if this is Klay's team, it's going to be a lot harder. I know there was also another game when Steph was out where Klay forced up a shot and Draymond got in his ear about it, and it wasn't anything dramatic. I mean, Klay took it and he expressed appreciation that Draymond held him accountable. But I think another thing that goes into Klay's efficiency this season, which I talked to him about earlier in the year, is he came into training camp in much better shape than in previous years. And that's not to say like he was out of shape. It was just that he was in absolute peak shape this year, where he was doing around-the-clock training throughout the summer. Like, he got his rest, but for all the stuff that was mentioned about, hey, China Klay, and he's having fun with his nightlife overseas, a lot of those times he was doing workouts. And then when he was in L.A., he was doing workouts on the beach. He hired a personal chef to make his meals so his diet's better. And you compare it to the previous year, it's not like he was loafing around by any stretch. But what it was is he's in deep in the finals. Then he plays Team USA, so he's still being active. But then he rests the entire time after that, which he should have done. Like, he's playing a lot of minutes, a lot of miles. That's what you do. But because of that framework, he was able to get some more training this offseason. And I think most importantly, he tweaked his diet where it's not like he was always eating junk food or anything, but he was really fine-tuning where he has a personal chef now that's just micro-analyzing everything. And I think that's gone into play as well, as far as not only his shots, but the fact that he's only missed 1 game this season. He hasn't had an injury at all, and he missed 1 game for quote-unquote rest purposes. I think a lot of that's gone into play with all those things.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's funny. I was scouring through the Mercury News a little bit to get some more tidbits before we started to record today, and I noticed that. Is it you guys have your stuff behind a paywall now? Is that right?
Yeah. I don't know how long it's been since then, but as you know, Nick, we're in the information age where people want to read content, but we're finding different challenging ways to monetize. And I think it's a good investment. I mean, not just because I work for the Mercury News, right? But when you're breaking it down economically, I think the price range is, if you were to subscribe digitally, I think it's on average like $2.50 a week, right? And even if here's the thing, if you're just a Warriors fan, I think that's worth the price. But the Mercury News is a local newspaper, so it has all the Bay Area sports coverage. It has all your local news coverage. So I think it's worth the investment. We have a lot of resources that cover the Warriors specifically. Like, I travel full time. I went to the China trip preseason. I'm at all road games, going to be at all the playoff games. And I have two colleagues, Melissa Rowland and Logan Murdoch, that also contribute. And I think, it's a real competitive beat, and there's a lot of good writers out there that cover the team. But we've tried to do a good mix of, hey, kind of fill in the day-to-day demands in terms of news and what comes out of shoot-arounds and game coverage. But we also do a lot of features, a lot of deep dives into things. And I think when you're just looking at it cost-wise, like $2.50, you're a Warriors fan, like, that's not really a lot to ask for.
And I bring it up because, as an announcement, bballbreakdown.com is going to go to a freemium model where we're going to have a lot of free content, and we're also going to have some deeper, in-depth articles that behind a paywall, and then also some access to me directly for some live shows too. So, just my ears pricked up when I saw that, and I wanted to at least talk about it for a second and let everyone know out there that and it's going to be the same kind of low price, just a little bit of a thing to help us maintain our standards and continue to provide excellent content. So, cool.
Yeah, and you know what? Totally unsolicited. I'm sure you'd welcome this feedback. Like, I can't emphasize enough. Like, when I see you out in the field, Warriors, like, you can definitely tell that guys like Steve Kerr and the players are very well aware of the great content that you provide, and you're able to, I think, provide like a unique set of perspectives and content that really help explain the game. So if you're like a basketball junkie or just a casual fan, like, this is a really good window in learning different things. And I think it's also a new avenue for players and coaches to talk about, like, just general media. Like, they're always talking about the news and the day-to-day. And I think with your platform, like, they're really able to break it down in a smart, understandable way of different basketball concepts, and I think there is a huge demand for that kind of basketball coverage.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I was made fun of mercilessly at having my fanny pack on, talking to Steve Kerr on the court, and a friend of the breakdown, Let's Go Warriors on Twitter, was tweeting out a video of that, and then JaVale gave me a thumbs up later with a fanny pack.
There you go.
Which is nice of him. So, at any rate, yeah, I mean, well, before we wrap this up, I thought we could talk a little bit about any of the possible trades that were like going to happen, or what the Warriors have been trying to do. Were there any? Did you hear about any possible stuff that they were trying to make happen?
Yeah, I know that the Warriors ideally were trying to get some secondary scoring. When you're looking at just some of their issues, their outside shooting with their bench unit isn't good. I think they're ranked toward the high 20s in terms of bench scoring. Now, the caveat is that obviously they're a top-heavy team. A lot of times Steve Kerr will stagger his bench unit with a Klay Thompson, a Durant, or a Draymond, and sometimes they're taking the lion's share. But they're definitely were looking at doing that. Maybe they're considering trying to see if there's any packages that would allow them to reduce some of their front court depth, because they have a lot of bigs. But I think there's a few things that came into play. They did not. They want to keep their first round pick, so that they feel like that's a premium of getting a young guy that they can develop. I think they're also aware, like, Jordan Bell is supposed to be evaluated later this week or after the All-Star break, so he's expected to be back this season. But there was an awareness of him or any other big. Maybe they get hurt at some point. The fact that they have a lot of bigs to work with might actually help them down the long run, whether it's an injury or just matchup purposes. Like, Steve Kerr loves to tinker with that rotation. And then I think the other part that they're valuing was continuity. Like, even though the Warriors bench isn't the greatest, like, they felt like the fact that they were able to have that continuity from this past season really goes into play with, even when you're looking at the top-heavy guys, like, just the familiarity, the team-oriented mindset, and they felt like because of how successful they are, they'll stand pat. That's not to say they're not looking at potential buyout candidates. I know like Marco Bellinelli was a guy that intrigued them, but I don't think they're like breaking the bank to try to do these things. Like they're only going to do it if it's on a minimum deal, and they would have to waive a player. So I think my expectation is they'll stand pat. And, this is probably one of few teams that you would say, hey, that's a good thing. They're obviously the Warriors. They're defending champs. They have a lot of good talent. So maybe down the line is when they would have to make tough decisions as far as what they do with their roster. But, that's what the offseason for. A lot of these bench guys are going to be free agents. So that's when they'll see, what combinations as far as that rotation goes would be best served for them.
Sure. And you can see when you're looking at the five-man lineups and how many minutes they're playing, the tinkering you mentioned with Steve Kerr, after the starters have played in the last 19 games since Steph came back. They played 12 games together, 160 minutes. And after that, there is the interesting lineup with Draymond Green, Iguodala, Sean Livingston, Klay Thompson, and David West. That's your second most played in terms of minutes. And then after that, it drops down so precipitously, which means to me, that Kerr isn't playing any five-man lineups very many minutes together at all. And I have to imagine that probably contributes to some degree to the unevenness and maybe the reason why once they cut the rotation down for the playoffs, you'll start seeing plus 20 again on those net ratings and plus 15 instead of plus 6 or in the negatives.
Yeah, and when you're breaking down the bench identity, like David West has been dependable, numbers-wise, presence-wise. Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, they've been struggling with their shot, but Steve Kerr, even though there's complications of like you want to have Andre be a threat on the floor so he can play with some of those star guys to make that depth lineup. Other than that, Steve has mostly downplayed Sean and Andre not shooting the ball well because of all the other positive attributes they have. But when you look at the rest of the reserves, you really don't know what you're going to get. Nick Young has been very inconsistent with his shot. Patrick McCall is a young guy that has been struggling with kind of finding his way, struggling to find his comfort level with being assertive. Omri Caspi has been dealing with two challenges of staying healthy, and then two, Steve Kerr will gush on and on about Omri Caspi's basketball IQ and his cutting and how he gets open, but he seems gun-shy of taking open three-pointers. And you need to have that on your team. Like, he doesn't have to be the main guy taking that because they have guys like Steph and Klay, but he's been almost reluctant to take open shots. I think because of those guys, that's made it very challenging of knowing what bench rotations to do. And then as far as the bigs go, it's been a combination of Steve wanting to chase matchups. So sometimes he goes big, sometimes he goes small. But also, it's been things of their inconsistency. Like on one hand, Jordan Bell has been this real promising rookie. He has a lot of athleticism that you can't teach and seems to be a guy that you could build long term. But there's a lot of fundamentals that he lacks. Kevon Looney is kind of the opposite. Like he is your stable, solid guy that will hold the fort down, but he doesn't do anything spectacular. And then JaVale McGee has shown like bursts of energy in certain games. And then there's times where you see he's struggling kind of adapting the modern NBA of being able to defend out in the wing. And so because of all those varying moving parts, that bench identity has always been fluid game to game.
For sure. Well, what was fluid as well as this conversation, because we certainly ran through the gamut of what's going on with the Warriors and whether or not they're going to be able to win. I do want to remember, before I forget, to tell everyone, if you like this podcast, make sure to head over to iTunes and give us a rating and a review. That always helps. I'd like to see more of those. And also make sure to check out Mark's podcast, Planet Dubs Podcast, and also his Twitter account, _Medina on Twitter. Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining us and breaking this stuff down. This was great.
Yeah, Nick, I can't thank you enough for having me, for plugging all the things. It's real fun talking hoops with you. And again, you got to subscribe to Nick's website. You got to subscribe to my website. We will give you a lot of bang for your buck here.
Awesome. Well, that is a great way to finish this up. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel. We're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Mark?
Oh, I'm in. Sign me up.